this morning is from the book of Mark, chapter 6, verses 6b to 13. You can follow along in your own Bible or the screen behind me. Then Jesus went around, teaching from village to village. Calling the 12 to him, he began to send them out, 2 by 2, and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. Take nothing for the journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off of your feet as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. This is God's word.
I wanted to begin our discussion of this section of the Gospel of Mark. And again, we're working our way through the Gospel of Mark, and this just happens to be the section where we find ourselves today. But I wanted to begin in a very odd way. I think maybe as we go through a little further in our discussion of this section, you might see why we're starting this way. But I'll tell you right now, it might not make sense to you. Hopefully it will make more sense later. And this is something, frankly, that we ought to do more frequently as a church family, and it's something that I fail at. But I wanted to remind you of the core values that seek to keep us on track as a church family. What are the things that are important for us? We've declared these things to be important to us. So I'm going to ask you to read with me from the screen our core values, and certain key points along the way are going to form connections with what we're going to talk about a little bit later as we go. All right? So what I want you to do is read the first phrase out loud together. Just read up to the comma, and then I'm going to talk about it afterwards. Read together.
We desire to be a people that seriously engages the Bible.
Now, it would be interesting to know your thoughts as to how well we do that. Are we seriously engaging the Bible? And why would we do it? Because these are writings that we believe are given by God to us to teach us about himself. And therefore also to teach us about ourselves and who we are not and what's wrong with us. And to teach us about how we can have life with him. How can we live together with him in this world and forever? This is why we engage the Bible. Now read the second core value up to the comma together. We desire to be a people that practices biblical community. And why would we do this? In order to help each other to follow Jesus rather than each one of us trying to do it all alone. You know, you're not designed to be successful at this by yourself. You're not designed to be successful at following Jesus without the support of others. And others equally need your support, which is why it's so important that we meet together. So we don't wind up feeling like we're on our own. Now, practicing biblical community has many aspects to it, but that's for a different sermon. Okay? Now the third one, just read it up to the comma. We desire to be a people that shares Christ and grows new believers. And then the next part tells you why. Because the message of forgiveness and life with Jesus is a message of good news for all people. For all people. Now, you're going to find it quite obvious how that core value connects with what we're going to say in a few moments. So keep that one in mind. Now let's look at the fourth one. Read it up to the comma. We desire to be a people that provides a safe place to seek. Now what do we mean by that? Well, all of us need to be allowed the grace to work out our own struggles with faith while being encouraged to trust and follow Jesus. In other words, I don't want you to think that everybody who's here has it all together and doesn't struggle with doubt. We are a room full of people who struggle with doubt in different ways and at different times. But that doesn't mean you can't belong here. This is a good place for you. We want to welcome people who struggle with these things, who struggle to cling to Jesus. This is a good place for you. So if you feel like that's you, then know that you belong here. The 5. Let's just have you volunteer to read it solo. Who will read number 5 up to the comma out loud? I'm going to call. There you back in the back. Stephen.
We desire to be a people that blesses our surrounding community.
Read it the rest of the way.
That God cheers wants good things for it.
Do you believe that God cares about the community in which you live? Do you think He really wants good things for St. Leonard, Prince Frederick, Lusby, Solomons? Do you really believe that? So why wouldn't we then want to be the hands and feet who help bring good things? That would be kind of the point. We are a part of the kingdom of God, and what does the kingdom of God bring to a community? All right? And the sixth one, I volunteer to read that one out loud. Come on out, okay.
We desire to be a people that highly values missions because the good news of Jesus is good news for all people, not just the ones that are geographically or culturally near to us.
I've always liked the fact that we have that one in there. Now you notice part of it is basically, it's number 3, but with an extension. It's core value number 3, but we clarified something at the end. Why would we be involved in missions? Because all people matter to God, not just the ones that look like you, not just the ones who live life and think like you. All people. And so we want to be involved in crossing these so-called barriers, or these boundaries, these cultural boundaries, even geographical boundaries. Now, having reviewed those core values, which sort of help you remember who we are trying to be, let's get back to our passage for the morning and see if you can see the places where these intersect with that passage. Mark 6, the 6th verse, the second part of it, tells us that Jesus went around teaching from village to village. Now, it's a simple little statement, a simple little observation, but think about it. What would you do in this day and age if you had information that you deemed to be really important and you wanted to share it with everybody, and you wanted to make sure that nobody got left out as you're communicating the message? I would really like to know, how would you try to go about it today? What would you do? Twitter, that's what came to my mind. Twitter. How else would you go about it? Making sure that nobody gets left out. I guess Facebook is kind of old news, all right? I don't know. You might put it on Facebook. And this is really old school anymore. You might try to send an email out to everybody in your contact list. I don't know. Again, that's kind of even a dinosaur, I guess. See, I don't do social media, so I don't really know these things. I'm just gathering from what I observed that, yeah, that one may be kind of passé. But these are probably the things that you would try to do. You might really go real old school and send out a mailer to every physical street address in the county. You might try that. Okay, well, just think what we find here in this passage. One thing we see in the passage is that Jesus was not content to stay in one place and share his good news with just one group of people. The passage tells us that he went from village to village to village to village. His intention was that everyone should hear his message and that everyone should have a chance to receive his invitation to participate in the kingdom of God. And so he went from village to village to village. The message was for all people. His invitation to share in the kingdom of God was not limited to a select few in a certain geographical location. Now, often you and I have limits upon how far we'll go extending an invitation. And let's say it's even the invitation to participate in the kingdom of God. The invitation to know that your sins are forgiven and you were brought into the family of God. You know, I remember Jason speaking not terribly long ago, and he was reminding us of the fact that we tend to draw a circle, and certain people are left outside of the circle. And we only think about going so far. And where does your circle stop? Who's left on the outside of your circle? Where wouldn't you go in terms of broadening this invitation? Do you stop with people who look like you do? Do you stop with people who are of a certain economic stratus? Where do you stop? You know, the broader question is this, and this is what I get from this first section of our passage for the morning. Do you share Christ's passion for all people to to hear the good news of the kingdom of God? Or do you not share that passion? Now, I would submit to you that to the degree we fail to share that passion, we are unformed in terms of the character of Christ. If you are going to be Christ-like, that will be a passion that you share. And if it's not a passion that you share, something needs to tweak in you. God needs to get a hold of your heart at a certain level and help you to see that this is his heartbeat. Remember core value number 3 and number 6. I'm not going to read to you number 3. We'll just go straight to number 6. And I only want to point out the last line of it. The message of forgiveness of sins is good news through Jesus for all people, not just the ones who are geographically close to you, not just the ones who are culturally close to you. What's interesting is how that's changed. It's not so much geographical boundaries anymore. I mean, people are living next door to you or the next neighborhood over who are from completely cultural different places. And do you care? Okay, now what we see in this passage is Jesus manifesting this value. Now notice how Jesus started right away involving other people in his passion for the spreading of this good news. Do you remember that Jesus recruited a certain number of people to travel with him? What did he call those people?
12 disciples.
Disciples. And how many of them were there?
12.
Okay, 12. Now we know that there were more disciples than that, but there were the 12 disciples with a capital D. And do you remember what Jesus actually said to some of them when he called them to follow him? He said, "Follow me and I will make you
Fishers.
fishers of men." You realize that this was Jesus stating that he intended from the get-go to involve them in helping carry out his mission. Now that wasn't just talk, because here in Mark chapter 6, we see what Jesus did about that. Verse 7a says this, "Calling the 12 to him, he began to read it out loud.
Send them out 2 by 2.
Send them out 2 by 2. So it was Jesus' intention from the get-go to involve his disciples in his work. Now listen, he had no intention of merely filling their heads with information. In fact, Jesus was doing what we might call apprenticing these folks. He was training them to live as he lived. He was training them to do as he was doing. He was bringing them in and forming them. And I love when my wife prayed, she actually used this. And this is going to be something we talk about throughout the message this morning. She talked about being formed. Forming us. That's a very getting your hands dirty kind of a thing. And it's a very get down there in the earth, getting the clay all over your hands kind of a thing. It's not about filling one's head with information. Picture a person working with clay. Not Clay Mitchell. Because that would be kind of messy. Sorry, bad joke. Jesus was apprenticing these folks. And once I heard another pastor who I served with talk about concerns he had with what he used to call the Bible study culture. And I put that in quotation marks. He had problems with what he called the Bible study culture. And at first I was a little bit offended by that because I've had great experiences with leading Bible studies and so forth. Places where groups of people come together to read and to study and discuss the Bible. So I struggled to understand what he meant. But in time, I began to understand what he meant. And I even began to share, to a certain degree, his concern about what I will call the propagation of a mindset that says, take in, take in, take in, take in, feed me, feed me, feed me. And it really began to feel rather gluttonous to me. Some folks seem to think that being a Christian and growing as a disciple is about being constantly and perpetually stimulated by the taking in of more information and new information that you hadn't heard before, as though that makes you a good disciple. some seem to think that this is what it means to grow. But here's the caution. This is what I began to understand with years. If we are not careful, we inadvertently foster a very self-focused way of thinking, a very self-focused way of behaving that feels, like I said before, to be rather gluttonous. And it says, feed me, feed me, feed me. Frankly, I have concerns when I see people excluding opportunities to serve others because their schedules are being dominated by Bible classes. You see, Jesus didn't do that. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay, what am I standing here doing? I'm standing here teaching the Bible, right? I'm helping you to study the Bible. Do I think that that's a bad thing? No, I think it's a very important thing. You do know that God gave to his church the gift of teachers. People who have a gift for sharing God's word. And to one degree or another, maybe I have it, maybe I don't. Depends on your perspective. But the very fact that he gives as a gift to his church teachers tells you, it presupposes that teaching is a necessary and important thing to him. Teaching the Bible, teaching biblical thought, teaching biblical understanding and how it applies. So don't get me wrong on this. But perhaps, instead of learning more and more information, what we really need is to be developing the ability to use what we already know, however little that may be today, or tomorrow, or next week, and to use it in real life service to other people.
Amen.
I had kind of a ridiculous image come to my mind this week as I was thinking this over. Can you imagine a person coming to think of herself as an NFL football player just because she's memorized the Redskins playbook? It's kind of a ludicrous notion when you think about it. See, is there not a substantial difference between mastering the information contained therein and actually developing the physical skills and physical ability and physical strength to execute it? You not see that those are wildly different things. And there's only one way to develop the skills, the strength, the stamina, the will to put into implementation the plays contained in that playbook. And that means you are going to have to get out there and do it. It always kind of strikes me that when the NFL preseason is going on, which I don't follow much anymore, but I used to, and I used to hear all the time players talk about the need to get out there on the field. Get out of the meetings and the film study sessions and the theory sessions where they're teaching the plays and stuff like that. They got to get out in the field and face the live ammunition. They got to get out there and get hit. They got to get out there and deliver the hit and know what it feels like to overcome the fact that you just got smacked in the mouth. And to move forward and execute the plays anyway. And there's only one way to do that. You got to get out there and do it. It's not about filling your head with information. So I submit to you that in some cases I feel like maybe we are undertaught or underdeveloped in that regard as disciples. Because teaching is not merely the transmitting of information. It's much more than that. Tim Keller always used to say, he'd use this little formula, he says, whatever it is he's talking about, we'll use the word teaching. Teaching is not less than that, but it's so much more than that. And it's a gross oversimplification to think of it as merely as transmitting information. So Jesus did more than transmit information to his disciples. Now, back to what my wife talked about in her prayer about formation. One of the things that has really begun to affect me over the years is to hear how in French-speaking Africa they talk about training. They use the word formation. And if you were to see it on the screen, you would know that's just your word formation. They don't use the word teaching. They use the word formation. You are being formed. This is the point of what we do, is to form a disciple. And it struck me that formation includes not only the transmission of information, but it also includes things like the importing of values to another person. How do you form different values in another person? Number one, you can't do it by yourself. There's going to have to be some cooperation on the other side. But there has to be the formation of certain values. Values like, and I would submit to you this is the big one, don't be a self-absorbed consumer of biblical information. See, that is a value. Don't become a consumer of religious goods and services. How about cultivating the value of being one who serves other people rather than thinks it's all about you getting, you receiving, as though that grew you in some way? I thought about water sources on the Appalachian Trail, which I do from time to time, as you know. And when you backpack, you don't want to be carrying lots of water with you. Why?
Hey,
It is heavy. It's one of the heaviest things you can carry with you. A lot of people start out, they got all this water, they got frying pans and stuff. Well, those go over the edge of the mountain real fast. When you realize you got to carry all of that. Man, you don't want to be carrying 2 gallons of water. You will not make it. So one of the things you have to do is you have to try to figure what is the bare minimum of water I can actually carry until I reach the next water source where I can replenish. That's one of the keys. Now the water sources are all over the place. Every now and then the trail will go through a town and actually get tap water. But most of the time, no. What are the other various water sources? Well, sometimes you come across a mud puddle in the middle of the trail. And because it's not a very attractive source, you carry a water filter. Hopefully as light a weight one as you possibly can, but you can filter it out. You can filter out the impurities. Sometimes you find a pond. Sometimes you'll find a little stream just barely bubbling across the trail. Other times you'll be walking alongside a big river that's rushing. So the water sources vary, and you don't have any control over which ones you're going to come across. Now the point is, some water sources are more desirable than others, even if you've got the filter. Ponds and puddles can sometimes be rather unappetizing. Maybe they don't smell really good, maybe they don't look really good, maybe they're tinted red. Up in New Hampshire and Maine and New York State, Detroit, where you find these pockets of water that are just, it looks like they're just stained with rust. You think, I'm going to drink that? The answer is yes. I mean, you're going to filter out the impurities, but it still doesn't look good because it's stained. Filter doesn't take that out. Okay? Some water sources are just simply more desirable than others. Some sources, the water in them becomes stagnant. And the more desirable sources are the ones that are flowing, the ones that are moving, because anything that happened upstream is not going to sit there and stay. It's going to move on. Okay? And the best sources are water sources that are moving, that are just now coming out of the ground. Does that make sense to you? Because nothing's had a chance to happen to those sources. So those are the most desirable sources. And I thought, how true is that of us? Unless there's a flow, unless there's an input and an outflow, basically you get fat. You get stagnant. It's not a pretty thing. So Jesus sent his disciples out, and he gave them all kinds of instructions that we see in this passage. Jesus used OJT, on-the-job training. His disciples traveled with him. They served with him. They ministered with him. He sent them out. They didn't just sit in classes where they filled volumes of notebooks with information. Now, there's another thought to be considered here in this one little section. Read it for me. Jesus sent his disciples out how? 2 by 2. 2 by 2. And I thought. If this is about formation, if that's what this is about, crafting and cultivating and developing certain things in disciples that actually makes you a disciple, what does this instruction teach us about what Jesus was trying to form in them? The fact that he sent them out 2 by 2. Could it be that there is a downside to sending out disciples 1 by 1? If so, what would it be? Is there a danger in what we might call Lone Rangerism? And I thought, let's just play with this. What are some of the benefits? What are the things that would be reinforced in Jesus' disciples by the fact that he sent them out not alone, but 2 by 2? Tell me what your ideas are before we splash these on the screen. They didn't go up already, did they? Okay, good. Tell me your ideas. What are the benefits to sending out the disciples 2 by 2 as opposed to just on their own? Support. Accountability. Help. Keep going. These are great.
Encouragement, community? Encouragement or community?
Community, you say?
Yeah.
Okay, you guys are all over this. I mean, you guys should be preaching the sermon. Okay? You guys have nailed it. Here's what I thought of. These were what first came to my mind. Number one, there'd be a built-in support or built-in encouragement. If you get a little down, you need somebody to lift you up, you got it. It's right there because you're not by yourself. It again reminds you about, why we do church. 2, it made possible what I would call a more well-rounded wisdom. You ever heard 2 heads are better than 1? See, how best are we going to accomplish this? 2 heads can sometimes be better than 1, right? Okay? And it would also help with a broader perspective. Your perspective might get a little colored or stained. But when you have somebody else say, no, you don't look at it that way, it challenges your perspective. So you have a better wisdom. You have a safeguard regarding the souring of your perspective if you are not alone. Third, it provided a built-in accountability. Nobody's going to take a turn going off 180 degrees in the wrong direction without somebody knowing it and saying, dude, come on. So I thought about that, but I also realized that there's something even deeper than these things. And it's deeper to the point that you might miss this altogether. But Stephen already touched on it in what he said. Jesus' 2 by 2 approach promoted community. It promoted partnership. Notice what Jesus may be trying to form in his disciples here. I think him sending them out 2 by 2 would keep one from thinking in terms of my ministry. Furthermore, I think it forced the disciples to actually have to serve each other as they ministered. Do you know how hard that is? You all don't see things the same. And you may not like the way somebody else in your church family sees it. But you got to deal with it. Or just write them off and disappear. And that's not what Christ would have you do. So when you marry, you've got to figure out how in the world do I do life with this person? Because this part is driving me nuts. Do you realize how good that is for you? To realize that this ain't about you. You got to learn to eat it. You got to learn to work through it. Sometimes you just got, like I said, you don't eat everything, but sometimes you just have to realize, I'm just going to have to deal with it. Because sometimes things just don't get all the way you would want them to be. So when you have to minister with other people, this is part of the deal. Now, why does this stand out to me? Let me tell you, and I kind of got impassioned about this as I was thinking about this week. There is a particular ad campaign that is current, or it may just be slightly past current. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's probably still running. It's a Diet Coke ad. And the ad features this young woman, and she's walking through this crowd, and she's facing it. She's got a Diet Coke in her hand, or actually at some point she gets a Diet Coke in her hand. And she's saying the most ridiculous, absurd, inane things as she's walking toward you. And they're not intended to be inane or ridiculous or absurd, but when you think about it, they kind of are. And she says, you want to live in a yurt? Yurt it up! Do you want to run a marathon? That sounds super hard, but okay. I mean, just do you. And I actually Googled this this phrase in advertising campaigns, and it led me to another ad that features Russell Westbrook, NBA player. And this is actually a Mountain Dew ad. And in the ad, Russell Westbrook is saying things like, well, they tell you, don't take shots in practice you wouldn't take in a game. They tell you, don't be a distraction to your teammates. And he goes down this list of things they tell you. He said, you know what I tell you? I tell you, don't do they. Do you. Which led me to another ad that I've never seen. It's an ad for a casino, and it features the spokesperson walking through this crowded gaming room, just where people are just having a blast. It's just party time. And I'm not kidding you, as he's walking, he's talking to you. And he says, and I quote, we're all looking for a place where we can be ourselves and not apologize for it. So, you do you. Now, something about this individuality theme is right, but something is deeply amiss. It just doesn't jive well with the values of the kingdom of God. Jesus most certainly did not send out his disciples, exhorting them with the words, just do you. No, they were to serve him, not them. They were to serve others, not them. They had to serve each other as they were serving others. Just do you. Now, I want to be personal with you. Sometimes I am concerned about how insidiously this message has soaked into you. Sometimes I feel like we do community very poorly. We in general and we specifically. Sometimes it seems to me like each one of us is living our own lives, doing our own thing, whatever it is that seems exciting for us to do at a particular time, or a particular weekend, or a particular week. And at what point does it ever enter your mind the effect that you doing you this weekend might have on the spirit of this? Do you even ask yourself if your being present might mean something to somebody else? Do you understand? We have got it sunk in deeply that you just do you. Well, at what point do you start preferring to do others? This is what Jesus is doing. He's forming disciples for whom it is not said, just do you. What do you have to bring to the table merely by being here? And then the passage continues. It moves to verse 7. In the second part, we find that Jesus has called the disciples unto them as he has gone from village to village to village, and he sends them out 2 by 2. And verse 7 tells us, and he gave them authority over impure spirits. Now guys, this opens up a whole other can of worms. I feel like I just can't ignore this, but it seems like such an inconsequential phrase in the whole. But I feel like we ought to at least address this because it's such an odd thing if you consider it on its own. I will tell you that in some circles of Christianity, it is just assumed from passages like this one and some others that all Christians, at least those who are really spiritual, are going to go around issuing commands and giving orders to impure spirits that are in other people. Whether it's the demon of nicotine, I've heard that one. Or whether it's the spirit of sloth, I've heard that one. Or whether it's the demon of lust, I've heard that one. And we assume that we're to go around recognizing and barking out orders to the evil spirits who are being hosted by other people in your midst. No, we don't do that here. But I am telling you that in some circles of Christianity, that's the norm. And you are led to believe that this is something that we're all supposed to be doing, based upon passages like this one, because Jesus gave his disciples authority over impure spirits. That's what the passage says. And I say, really? Do all Christians have what you might call an ekbalo gift? Ekbalo is Greek for casting out. Are we all to have the gift of casting out impure spirits? Is it even called a gift? Well, Jesus gave them the ability to do it. See, I actually think that this is a unique mark of true apostleship. There's an intriguing verse that's found in the Pauline writings, 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 12, where Paul is writing to a church full of Christians, and he says the following. Just try to follow what's interesting about this. He says the following. He's writing to Christians, and he says, I persevered in demonstrating among you the marks of a true apostle. Stop. If you could use different words to communicate the content of that phrase, what would it be? What's another way of saying the marks of a true apostle? You tell me what's another way to say that same idea, the marks of a true apostle. What words would you use? Behaviors that do what? That show you are true. Well, it's not just being a Christian, it's being a
missionary,
an apostle. If you're looking for a different word, I'm sorry, yeah, I led you to do it. Okay, in other words, there are things that were unique to apostleship that set them apart among Christians. And Paul said he was persistent in doing those things that marked him as unique among Christians. And he tells you some of what they were in a very generic term, including signs, wonders, miracles. And you ask yourself, well, what were the signs? What were the miracles? What were the wonders? If you go all the way to the end of the gospel, which we are now exploring, Mark in chapter 16, in what I would say would be a section of verses that really deserves some more discussion. But we won't do that this morning. I'm just going to show you what is included in those verses that talk about these unique things that marked people out as true apostles out of the body of Christians. Mark 16, 17, and 18 says this, and these signs, and it's a quotation of Jesus, and these signs will accompany those who believe. Now you can ask yourself, those who believe, is that general Christians or is that specifically these apostles? I'll tell you what I think when we finish it. These signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons. Well, what did we just find Jesus gave his apostles the power to do? To drive out demons. In my name they'll drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands. And when they drink deadly poison, it won't hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people and they will get well. When's the last time you handled a deadly snake and got bit and weren't harmed?
Yeah, right.
When's the last time you cast out a demon? Okay, here's what you got to think here. Okay, if these signs will be a part of every Christian's life, then something's wrong with you.
Amen.
There is something systemically wrong here, because I doubt that any of you have done any of these things, probably in a long time, if ever. So that tells you if these are supposed to be the marks of Christians in general, then something is deeply wrong with you. Unless all of these are a part of your experience. I can tell you that I don't think any one of these have ever been part of my experience in 50 plus years as a Christian. So something's deeply wrong with me then. My point is, we see these clearly as signs of apostleship. Not signs of being a Christian, but signs of apostleship. And we see that Jesus has equipped his apostles in this way as he sent them out, which was a unique deal. Now there's one more section that I want to talk to you about. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Okay, we're not doing well on time here. So I want to give you one more section, and that will be it. Mark 6, verses 8 and 9. As Jesus sent out his disciples, he sent them out 2 by 2, and he gave them authority to cast out demons, impure spirits. And this tells us he did something else. These were his instructions. He said, take nothing for the journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals, but not an extra shirt. Isn't this not weird? Isn't this a weird couple of verses? First of all, he's dealing with what would have been garments and accoutrements of the first century, so it feels a little weird to you because we don't necessarily do the same things in the same way. So that's going to make it sound weird. But now I want you to think again in terms of what is Jesus trying to form in these followers of his? What does he want to form in you? Now, as you look at this list, I think it's fair to say that Jesus was thinking of forming these people in a certain way. Think of the clay getting molded and shaped. And the first thing I saw was utter simplicity. Utter simplicity. Do you realize how complicated our lives become? I think Jesus was cultivating an unencumberedness with regard to the excess stuff of this world. How encumbered are we as we live in this current day and age in a place that is very wealthy in comparison to other parts of the globe and at different times in human history? We are very encumbered. And I think Jesus would challenge our encumberdness. Do you realize that there are people who cannot serve Jesus because they are just too much in love with other things? And they cannot let them go. They cannot do without. And Jesus is saying, you're going to go out in my name, and you're not going to take anything. You're not even taking money. This is how unencumbered you are going to have to be if you will be my disciple, if you will be used. And it challenged me because, look, I'm honest with you. I am not unencumbered at all. I am loaded with stuff. And this is not a message that's telling you got to go get rid of it all. I'll let Jesus tell you that, okay? But I'm just saying, how hard is it to be unencumbered? There was a disciple, a helper of the Apostle Paul, whose name was Demas. And I told you before that Paul said that Demas deserted him. Why? Because he was in love with this present world. Oh, that cuts. That cuts. Jesus was forming his disciples. No, you will not be in love with this present world. Secondly, he was teaching them, forming in them complete trust. No, you're not taking extra money. No, you're not even taking a change of clothes. First of all, they probably didn't own changes of clothes. That's kind of a new thing and a unique thing. It always strikes me when I'm in Africa. People in their homes don't have closets. They don't have cupboards. They don't have drawers. What would you put in a closet? What would you put in a cupboard? What would you put in a drawer? The only clothes they have are the ones you're looking at, and they look like those are the only clothes they have. And this was much more like the world of Jesus' day. But you and I, we got these closets filled. Okay? He was teaching them complete trust, to teach total faith in God to provide for their needs. Now, I think, frankly, you and I, we avoid being put in that situation at all costs. You don't want to have to trust God to meet your needs. You would rather have backup. I get it. I feel the same way. But I think Jesus is trying to cultivate in his apostles there this sense of you will depend upon me and not upon you. For us, that feels like working without a net. We don't want to work without a net, I guarantee you. He was cultivating in them dependence upon other people as a heart attitude as opposed to self-sufficiency. You realize that God will meet your needs largely through other people. Our needs as a church are met how? You guys give, we're fine. You guys don't give, we got a problem. It's been true in my own life. People are moved by God to step up and give or do something. And he's teaching this. He's building this in. He's forming his disciples in this understanding. You are going to have to depend upon other people. You will not depend upon you. When I was in college, I was involved in a couple of singing teams. One was a choir and one was a smaller ensemble. And we would travel on the weekends and sometimes a week or two on a break or something. And each place we would go, guess where we would lodge? We would lodge in the homes of people. And as college kids, then, when you get together after the weekend, you start talking about what? You talk about, well, the accommodations you had over the weekend. Oh man, these people had a jacuzzi. Oh man, these people had an indoor pool. These people had an indoor basketball court. And these people, well, they didn't have much. And you would compare notes about the accommodations. And I thought, this is one of the things I think Jesus is addressing when he says, when you go into a place, stay in a home. That's where you stay until you leave there. There's a contentment thing there that Jesus is cultivating in his disciples. Dependence upon others and a contentment with whatever. And finally, he was cultivating in them generosity. Generosity that says, I'm going to give out and I will not demand anything for me. I will receive from others. I am giving to others. This is not about me and my demands and my needs. Anyway, these are the places where my mind went as I was thinking about what could Jesus have been instilling in his followers as he sent them out with these specific instructions. There's a lot more that could be said from this passage, but I'm out of time, so let's pray. Father, I thank you for this odd passage and yet strangely practical passage. Father, I pray that you would have your own way in my heart. And that you would have your own way in the heart of each person here. And those who are part of our family that are not here this morning. Continue to form us, Father. As we give to each other, we give to our community, and we invest in your work across the world. I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.